Welcome to the show. Welcome after a weekend when Foreign Minister Penny Wong disgraced Australia. I'll get onto that day of shame in a second. But also tonight, the Albanese government on budget eve suddenly tells us, hey, inflation isn't such a big problem. Are you being conned by people too desperate to spend? And a third boat of illegal immigrants caught in just 1 week as the government lost control of our borders. Also tonight, Meghan Markle tells Nigerians she's 43% Nigerian herself, and Nigeria is her home. I mean, seriously? Plus the shocking Jew hunting at Eurovision, the bullying of a 20-year-old Israeli singer in Sweden, hunted by a mob outside her hotel, mocked by other contestants, booed as she sang, and threatened, forcing her to travel in a massive police convoy. Is this the left today? Plus anger as the Prime Minister crashes a Hawthorn victory celebration. Did he do wrong? But first, nothing that Penny Wong does in the rest of her political life is going to wipe out her disgrace on the weekend. Getting Australia to vote in the United Nations to reward the mass murderers and rapists from Hamas. Now, this decision by our Foreign Minister is so disgusting, so dishonest, and so willfully blind to evil, I can hardly believe it. Wong has betrayed Israel. Worse, she's betrayed us. The shame of it. Now, I know we should also be blaming Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for this, but he just seems to be Penny Wong's doormat. On Saturday, Wong had Australia vote with other nations to ask the United Nations Security Council to accept Palestine as a full member of the UN. Now, just the timing alone tells you how wrong and how evil this decision of hers is. I need to give you a warning here because what I'm about to say may be distressing, and it should be. And I'm not even going to show you footage of what really happened. Wong has offered this reward just 7 months after Hamas terrorists invaded Israel on October 7 and slaughtered 1,200 people, most of them civilians, raped many women, beheaded men, shot children, and took 253 hostages, half of whom are still captive in Gaza, either dead or alive. Every Islamist terrorist will now get the message. Hamas, which runs Gaza, can pack rape Jewish women, it can sexually mutilate them and shoot them, they can kill children in front of their parents, and Penny Wong will then help their cause. Former Prime Ministers are stunned. Scott Morrison calls this vote the most hostile policy act of an Australian government to the State of Israel. This is what the terrorists want. Tony Abbott says it looks like rewarding the October 7 atrocity. And even Josh Burns, a federal Labor MP and Jewish, said Wong should have abstained instead. He said this decision will make Jewish Australians, already feeling persecuted by the way, feel even more isolated. But Wong denies she is doing exactly what she is doing. She's claimed that Hamas would not welcome this vote because it's part of Australia's push for a so-called two-state solution, both an Israeli state and a Palestinian state.
A two-state solution, both Israel and Palestine, is the opposite of what Hamas wants. Hamas does not want peace, and it does not want long-term security for the state of Israel.
Now that's just dishonest because Hamas had already embarrassed Wong by publicly saying, no, this vote was great. It did welcome it, calling it an affirmation of the international rally around our people. And can you believe this? The rapists and baby murderers and head cutters of Hamas say Australia's vote is proof that we rally to their cause. Penny Wong has encouraged them. But Wong is right on one thing. It's true. Hamas indeed does not want Israel to exist. It actually wants that October 7 massacre, what it calls the Al-Aqsa flood, repeated again and again until Israel is destroyed.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا، إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثاني وثالث ورابعة.
Hear that from a senior member of the Hamas Politburo. So who exactly does Wong think will run her Palestine and represented in the UN in her so-called pathway to a peace. Because there are only two options. One is the Palestinian Liberation Organization that right now controls the Palestinian Authority, which runs the West Bank. The other is Hamas, which runs Gaza, the other Palestinian territory. She's got to choose. But plot twist here, both of these actually want Israel wiped out. Now, you just heard that Hamas official say that's what we want. The PLO, on the other hand, is the terrorist organisation long run by Yasser Arafat, now by Mahmoud Abbas, who was elected the Palestinian Authority's president in 2005 and has banned new elections ever since for fear that Hamas would beat him after already taking over Gaza at gunpoint. And polls say, yes, indeed, Hamas would win any election. Now, it's true that the PLO, and like Hamas has said in English, it will recognise Israel's right to exist. But it never made good its promise to remove from its official covenant in Arabic its call for Israel to be destroyed. That PLO covenant, to this day, insists that armed struggle is the only way to liberate Palestine, and the state of Israel is entirely illegal. So, which of these two groups, each controlling half of Palestine, each wanting Israel destroyed, does Wong think should represent the Palestinian state that she wants in the UN? Which bunch of Jew-hating terrorists does Wong prefer? But I should add one more example of Wong's dishonesty and her cynicism. The UN's own charter says membership in the United Nations is open to all peace-loving states. You've got to be peace-loving. But which bit of terrorist-led Palestine does Wong now believe is peace-loving? Nothing Wong says to excuse this vote makes sense. She's even admitted she made Australia vote on Saturday for something she didn't even like.
This isn't the way we would have done things or the resolution Australia would have proposed.
She didn't want that wording, yet still voted for it. And Hamas is now rightly taking that as a win. You've got to ask, why did Wong do something so stupid and dangerous? Well, I think the answer is clear. Labor is just desperate to appease Australia's 800,000 Muslims, many of them packed into Labor seats. But now you can see the price of that Labor appeasement, encouraging terrorists. Australia telling them that rapes and beheadings and mass murder will help get them what they want, from us at least. What a day of utter shame. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, great to see you. You've written about this in The Australian today as well. This vote, Wong says it's a vote towards a peace solution. Is she right?
No, Andrew. I think the whole government bears collective responsibility for this, and it goes to the character of the government at the moment. It's entirely reactive, it has no traction, and it just makes completely transactional decisions based on the lowest common denominator in domestic politics. Any two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians can only come about when the two parties negotiate reasonable borders and a promise to safeguard each other's securities. In other words, Palestinians have to put an end to all claims on Israel and have to reject terrorism permanently and credibly. Now, I say 4 times in history, Israel has made the maximum offer to the Palestinians. I get to the figure of 4 by including the initial United Nations partition, which was supposed to have 2 states, Palestine and Israel. And each time these offers have been met by waves of Palestinian terrorism and sometimes Arab invasion. For the moment, therefore, Israelis think a 2-state solution is off the cards. But for anyone to think you can impose a 2-state solution out of that, with, as you say, Hamas dedicated to the physical destruction of Israel, Fatah not much different, and both parts of Palestine inciting tremendous anti-Semitic hatred, it's absurd. It just gives a win to Hamas, who, as you said, loves this resolution. They can say to the Palestinian people, look, we may have caused you immense suffering and blood and loss, but we advanced the Palestinian national cause in a way that no one else did. So this has validated our tactics. It's a sign of weakness internationally. It goes against not only the US and Britain, but most of our South Pacific partners voted either against this resolution or abstained from it. And it's a tremendously disappointing development with the Albanese government, because I think it indicates the abdication of any sense of decent foreign policy out of this government.
Well, my own column this morning, I don't think I've ever had a stronger reaction to a column. The outrage, getting up to 2,500 comments. The one excuse that apologists give for Wong that I can see is 143 countries, including Australia, voted yes to this recognition, or getting the Security Council to recognise it. America will veto it, but anyway. Just 9 countries, including the US, voted against it, and 25 abstained, including Britain. And they say all this proves that Wong is right to vote yes, is she?
No, what this proves, Andrew, is that at the United Nations there is a built-in Arab-African majority. There are dozens and dozens of Arab and North African and other Muslim states. There is one Jewish state. So most nations at the United Nations make the same sort of tawdry, cynical calculation. They say, well, look, we're going to get 100 dislikes if we vote in favour of Israel and 100 likes if we vote with the Muslim terrorists. So let's vote with the Muslim terrorists. And a lot of governments know they're doing the wrong thing, but they go along to get along. It's the path of least resistance. It means they're not singled out. But Australia has always been different from that. We take a values-based approach to foreign policy, and with our partners, the United States and Britain, our closest strategic allies, we try to act according to some principle. And ever since the foundation of Israel, we've had a bipartisan position that a two-state solution is preferred, but it can only come about with the negotiation, the successful negotiation between the two parties. What Labor has done now, and this is intensely irresponsible, is divide Australia along partisan religious lines. So almost all the Muslims are anti-Israel. Most of them are not very fanatical about the issue. Iranian Muslims, Horn of Africa Muslims, Turkish Muslims are much less upset about this issue than Arab and North African Muslims. But in any event, they're all anti-Israel. Most of them are anti-Israel. There's 100,000 Jews. So there are more votes in the Muslim corner than in the Jewish corner. And the Albanese government has now scorched a line of sectarian division right down the middle of Australia, because they've taken the Muslim position against the Jewish position. They would say they're against confessional politics, but that's what they've effectively done. Labor now sides with the Muslim community. The coalition now sides with the Jewish community. This is a despicable, terrible, destructive path for Australia to walk down. And we walk down it for one reason only: the Albanese government's tawdry calculation about voter politics. And I'd say, Andrew, it's not even appeasing the 800,000 or more Muslims. It's appeasing potential Greens voters in the inner city seats, the same kind of people who voted, for the voice of Gaza in the British Council elections. The dopey, ahistorical, uneducated university students and graduates, I say uneducated and graduates in the one sentence quite advisedly, who might vote against Labor because the Greens are more anti-Israel. But if that's Labor's rationale, it's pathetic.
Just speaking of Wong, before I go, I need to ask you about this, Greg. It's now 9 days since China attacked one of our Navy's Seahawk helicopters in international waters, dropping flares above it and in front of it, endangering our airmen. In those 9 days since, Penny Wong has not said one single word in public about China's attack, not a word of criticism. She encourages Hamas, all right, says nothing about China. Can you explain that for us?
Well, it is a striking contrast that you draw, Andrew. I don't myself personalise it to Wong. These are government decisions, cabinet decisions. Now, as I understand it, the government has decided to let defence take the lead in this Chinese matter. But this is, again, a measure of weakness, because defence takes the lead by having most of the dialogue in private amongst defence officials. So Albanese made a statement, Miles made a statement, and that's it. We've called ambassadors in from other countries for matters far less important than this, far less important than this. But here is the Chinese military intentionally endangering the lives of Australian servicemen and women who are acting in pursuit of United Nations sanctions resolutions with the full authority of the Australian government in international waters. They are endangered by the aggressive actions of the Chinese military, and our foreign minister doesn't even call in the Chinese ambassador to issue a formal démarche. Now, this is a government-wide decision, but again, it is a pathetic, reactive line of least resistance. You know, we are mice and we're going to behave like mice kind of action. And I tell you what, if the courage of the Albanese government stood between you and misfortune, you'd want to say your prayers.
Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time. I have to say, this has been absolutely a shameful, one of the most shameful episodes in Australian foreign policy. Unbelievable. But the Albanese government's actually in big trouble on another front and has come out with a trick to bail it out. Now, the government desperately needs tomorrow's budget to save it because it's falling in the polls because of the cost of living crisis predominantly and the sense of drift, and elections are due early next year. So this is this big chance, but it's trapped. The government wants to give handouts because of the cost of living thing, but if it spends too much, that'll help keep inflation too high, as the Prime Minister actually conceded today to Labor MPs.
Importantly, cost of living relief that doesn't add to inflation, indeed that reduces inflation. And a tax cut for every single taxpayer, not just some.
But good news for the government. The government's budget tomorrow is actually going to say inflation this financial year will actually be much lower than the Reserve Bank predicted. In fact, predicted just 6 days ago. Indeed, the government says inflation by December is going to be just 2.75%. And that's more than 1% lower than the Reserve Bank reckoned just a week ago. I'm assuming that that may be because of something like rebates on power bills coming up in this budget to bring down inflation. But I also assume that the government could then treat this as an excuse to again spend more than it should, which is wonderful for the government. Joining me is the Monday political panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, and Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Michael Kroger, that's a huge difference really in the scheme of things between the government and the Reserve Bank. Inflation by December, the government says 2.75, the Reserve Bank says no, 3.8. How do you explain that?
Well, Andrew, this is absolutely fascinating, and I'll explain it this way. At her press conference last week, the Governor of the Reserve Bank was asked by an enterprising journalist, did you discuss at the meeting the day before raising rates? And she said, we discussed raising rates and keeping them the same. What's missing from that answer? And so one economist last week said rates might be raised 3 times. That won't happen. There's never any chance of that happening. If there were 2 rate rises of, say, 0.25, the government probably won't be re-elected. 1 rate rise, they could probably get away with. But the government is absolutely desperate to make sure there are no increases in interest rates, which is why you come back to the inflation number. I think what the government are trying to do here is intimidate the Reserve Bank. That's the only thing I can say. The difference between the two estimates is so massive. They're trying to intimidate the Reserve Bank into saying to them, we're moving into a low inflation environment. Don't you dare even think about raising rates. We're going to 2.75 at the end of the year. You're saying, 3.8, 3.5 over the fiscal 25 year. Inflation's going down. We've got it under control. We're not spending too much. Don't you dare increase rates. And that's what they're doing to the Reserve Bank. They're trying to create a climate, Andrew, where there's no need to increase interest rates.
That said, Stephen Conroy, of course, Treasury say, the government's budget papers are allegedly backed by Treasury, so I presume there's something behind it. Can you explain the difference between the government saying...
Yeah, really simply, Andrew. I can explain it really simply. The Reserve Bank are clowns.
Yeah.
Okay? In the last 10 years, they have a target between 2 and 3%. Do you know how many times? No, I'm going to actually be fact-based about why they're clowns. Okay? Last 10 years, 2 to 3%. Do you know how many times they've achieved it? 4 times. 4 times. That's it. Just that. They have not got their forecasts right 80% of the time. 80% of the time, the Reserve Bank have got it wrong. And I was brutal on Philip Lowe, and I will be brutal on Michelle.
Can I ask you one thing about it? Yeah, they're wrong, you say, 4 times. Do they actually tend to be wrong by underestimating inflation?
Up, below or above? Both. That's the problem. Both.
Underestimating?
Okay? Wage forecasts for both, under and over. So, interest rates, inflation, wrong for 10 years. Now let's talk about wage forecasts of those clowns at the Reserve Bank. Wrong for 10 years straight. They didn't get close on wage forecasts. These people, no, they've got them. They've forecasted them higher, and they've been lower. No, they've estimated them higher. The actual real world for 10 years has been lower. Now, I said the 10 years, before we came into power. And I remember Phil Lowe. Phil Lowe playing the good guy.
You made your point.
It's not that long ago Phil Lowe wanted to be the... No, I haven't finished.
Yeah. Treasury forecast.
Yeah, well, I think you have. They're clowns. They certainly
can't forecast the price of iron ore. No question.
They're all clowns. Okay, they're all clowns. That's easy. Well, that was solved. Meanwhile,
easy.
Michael, today...
No, they're just wrong. And they're factually, provably wrong.
We shall see. The government hasn't had a great forecasting record either. Meanwhile, today another boat of illegal immigrants, Sir Michael, the third in a week to land or nearly land in Australia. 3 in a week. We've now had 5 Rwandans land in Sabai. That's very close to the PNG. 33 at Christmas Island, and 5 Vietnamese now intercepted off Broome. Coincidence that we get so many boats in a week, or is this becoming a serious trend that brings us right back to the Rudd-Gillard governments?
No, I think it goes back to the Rudd-Gillard government's people. The people smugglers who are the most, egregious people in the world run on propaganda. And I'm sure they're saying, listen, this government's much more sympathetic to people. You go into jail for a while, into detention for a while, then they let you out. The courts will let you out. So that's what happens.
That will be the High Court.
That's what happens
on legislation that Peter Dutton put up.
That's what happens in Australia. You have to be in detention for a while, but that's better than staying wherever you are. You're in detention for a while, then they'll let you out. That's what they'll be selling. That's the message they'll be selling. And everyone knows the Labor Party are hopeless on border protection.
This is Peter Dutton's legislation.
Oh, please, Stephen. You let all these people out of detention when you didn't need to. That case related to XYZ case related to one person, you let a whole 150 out.
What about the bloke Peter Dutton let out of Parliament?
They know they'll...
Who has a gun charge?
They know.
What about him? He was there.
Weak on these issues.
In the assault on that poor woman. Peter Dutton's let out.
OK. They know Labor have historically been hopeless on these issues, and that's what the people smugglers would run on, I would assume, Andrew.
Look, it's just embarrassing, Andrew, that Peter Dutton let out one of the 3 people
Dutton's fault.
Who beat up that poor lady in Perth. And he had a gun charge. It wasn't just, he's just not much of a risk. He had a gun charge.
Maybe did the other, but you had plenty of excuses for that.
And Peter Dutton is responsible for that person.
Give me a break.
It's a fact.
I need to ask you one thing before we go, Stephen. The decision of the Albanese government to vote yes to get the UN Security Council to accept Palestine as a member of the UN. Hamas has welcomed this decision. Are you embarrassed by it?
Well, look, I don't take anything that comes out of the mouths of any Hamas official other than propaganda. It's not a decision I would have taken. That's no surprise to you, Andrew. I think an abstention and sticking with the previous position would have been a better place to be. But let's not forget, when we talk about, and you talked at length correctly about Hamas and the PLO, etc., not recognising a two-state solution, not wanting Israel to exist, well, let's just be very clear who else has said they don't want a two-state solution in the last few months. And one guy's called Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. He is consistently, in the last few months, refused...
Stephen, you were going really well.
I'm just making the point.
Where your heart is in
I'm
this
just
one.
making the point that you need both parties to want a two-state solution.
Shorn of context, Israel's
no, there's no context in his.
Is for a Palestinian state, but not now, given what
Except when Bibi said
not now.
Perfectly
not
logical.
Now.
Stephen, this deserves people of the right of Labor to actually stand up and denounce this disgusting, appalling, embarrassing, shameful and illogical call. And I expected better from you, I have to say. I just cannot believe this has been done and how few of the Labor right, the once mighty Labor right, are prepared to call it out. Where's Bill Shorten as well? Come on. Call this stuff out.
I just said,
where's Richard Marles? Where is Richard Marles?
I would have abstained.
Now, if you're going to play party politics on this
I would have abstained if I was in a decision-making.
Well, look, yeah, and then you turn it on Israel. Please, mate, there's too much of that. We've got to be more
I'm
firm
giving
on that.
context to what's happening right now today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. After the break, lynch mob. How a mob of Israel haters, including Greta Thunberg, menaced a 20-year-old woman, a Jewish singer at Eurovision, forcing her to travel in a huge police escort for her safety. And related, I'll talk to a Zionist who says that being anti-Zionist, there's a lot of leftists say, oh, I'm not just anti-Zionist, is actually too often an excuse for just hating Jews, like him. I never thought I'd live to see these changes. We've just seen how ugly the new Jew hatred is over the last week during the Eurovision Song Festival in Malmö, Sweden. You've got to ask, what has the left become? I mean, here we had a 20-year-old singer, Eden Golan. She was Israel's contestant. And just having her, a Jew, in the contest, had hundreds and hundreds of anti-Israel protesters outside her hotel, kicking up a din, trying to intimidate her, stopping her from going outside. They included global warming guru Greta Thunberg. I mean, relevance deprivation there. Protesters also heckled and booed Golan as she sang. At press conferences, other contestants, like Greece's, treated her like dirt when she was getting asked questions, pretending to sleep when she spoke. And Ireland's, the supposed witch, I mean, here goes civilization down the toilet, cried when Golan made the semi-finals.
I cried with my team.
And when Finland's jury gave votes to Golan, its TV anchor refused to pass them on, declaring Ireland the winner instead, quite deliberately.
12 points from Finnish jury goes to Ireland.
I think we have somewhat of a technical problem.
And she refused to correct herself. The whole thing was so menacing, so hysterical. It was like one of those 2-minute hates from 1984 that Golan couldn't even travel in Malmö, where up to a quarter of the locals are now Muslim in this Swedish country, without this massive police escort. Now, the good news is that while the arts community treated Golan like scum, the audience watching at home actually gave her the highest popular vote of any contestant, meaning she came 5th overall. And this brave 20-year-old who wouldn't be intimidated returned to Israel as a hero. But more than that, really, what she went through would confirm to many Jews that Israel is now the only country where they can still be Jews in safety, and Israel must not fall. And I wonder how anyone on the left can now look at how the mob treated that one lone Jewish woman and feel anything but disgust at what this movement has become. Now, I hear many people of the left, excusing what we're seeing, saying, oh, no, you're wrong, Andrew. This is not Jew hatred. This is people, we're just anti-Zionists. We're anti-people who think Israel has a right to exist. We love Jews. Well, I think that's a con, a new label on the old anti-Semitism. And joining me is a man who has written about exactly this in the Times of Israel is actually an Australian, Jeremy Stode-Linder, a principal of Melbourne's Bielek College. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. You say in this terrific article, I urge people to read it, you're a Zionist principal of a Zionist school. Can you explain what Zionist means to you?
Sure. Look, thanks for having me on, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Being a Zionist is really an uncontroversial and uncomplicated concept. For thousands of years, there's been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. Jews pray every day to Israel as an important part of its prayer. The Hebrew word for Israel is Tzion in Jewish prayer, which is where the word Zionism comes from. So really, all being a Zionist means is the identification with Israel as a homeland for the Jewish people. And in context, globally, there are over 2.4 billion Christians, over 1.9 billion Muslims. There's 20 Muslim countries in the Middle East and North Africa, and globally there's just 15 million Jews. That's it. And all Zionism is an identification with Israel as a tiny slither of land, a third the size of Tasmania, for a small population, just 15 million, less than the population of New York is the global population of Judaism. And Zionism is just the belief in that land as a homeland for those people.
And don't forget, the nearly a quarter of the Israeli population are in fact Palestinians and Muslims. Now, what do you make? I'm sure you've heard it too. So many people on the left, so many protesters say, no, how dare you call us anti-Semites? We're anti-Zionists. Big difference. Do you believe them?
Well, I'm afraid the majority of the Jewish community simply doesn't accept that and doesn't believe that. It's like saying to a Christian, we're going to dissect part of your identity and faith and tell you what you should believe. It's like saying, hey, we're okay with Christianity, but not with Jesus. Or it's like saying to a Muslim, hey, we're fine with Islam, but just take out the Mecca and the Medina part of it. For Jews, for the majority of Jews, Zionism is an integral part of our identity, our culture, our practice, our belief, our prayer. We pray 3 times a day to about a return to Zion. We just finished the festival of Passover, which ended with next year in Jerusalem. It's an incredibly intellectually dishonest and arrogant statement to say that we allow you to be a Jew, but we don't allow you to be a Zionist. And the reality is, when the majority of Jews hear chants like, Zionists are not welcome here, Zionists out, what they hear, and we believe what is meant, is Jews are not welcome here, Jews out. And there is no place for that in 21st century Australia.
Well, I thought there wasn't, and I thought I'd never have to confront this. But how do you explain what you're seeing now, this Jew hatred in Australia?
Look, it's gone crazy. And I think what we're seeing is, in particular on student campuses, but also in city centres, in CBDs, we're seeing a cohort, and they are a cohort of people who think it's 1968, who think this is civil rights, who think it's Vietnam, and they see this as a very binary conflict. They're dressing up, they're cosplaying, and what this is, in my view, this is a hit job. This is a hit job by the far left and by radical Islam. And we know it's a hit job because when we look at the protests, if these were people that genuinely cared about values, human dignity, life, then where are they on Darfur? Where are they on Myanmar? Where are they on China and the Uyghurs? Where are they on the rights of women or LGBTQI people in the Middle East? Where are they on all these things when they only focus on Israel? And they don't just only focus on Israel, they completely ignore all those others and they ignore Hamas. Hamas, which as a prescribed terrorist organisation on October the 7th murdered 1,200 predominantly Jewish Israelis, mutilated, raped, took hundreds of hostages. When there is no mention of that in these protests, then we know that these aren't protests just against an Israeli policy. This is anti-Semitism.
Look, I wish I disagreed with you, but I think every word gold. Jeremy Stowe-Lindner, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it in these troubled times. After the break, uproar as the Prime Minister joins a victory huddle of an AFL club. So what did he do that was so wrong? To an amazing and important wake-up from New Zealand. You know, the Albanese government, this is the budget tomorrow, it's going to talk more about what it's doing to supposedly stop that terrible global warming. And this is after it panicked last week about how it's all going, this transition to renewables. So, whoops, we actually need a lot more gas to keep on the lights because wind and solar isn't cutting it. And the crisis is obviously coming. And to see what that crisis will look like, look at what happened in New Zealand last Friday. Thanks to the same kind of global warming insanity that's been pushed there by now former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, the big hero of the international left. On Friday was a plea, New Zealanders, please stop using electricity during the cold snap.
Industrial consumers have also been warned, as have line companies, that they may need to cut off things like hot water systems temporarily. But if all those actions don't actually help, then Transpower could start switching off power to some parts of the country, and that's to prevent widespread and longer outages. Now, this is all a result of the cold snap sweeping across the country.
Cold shower in New Zealand. And here's the minister there explaining why there was so little power.
We have seen a significant increase in these types of warnings since 2018, when the last government banned oil and gas exploration. Without that gas to back up when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, we don't have the energy we need as a country.
In fact, thanks to New Zealand Labor's bans on new gas projects, New Zealand lost half its domestic gas production in the last 5 years. Meanwhile, look at what we're doing to our own. Joining me are Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, and Steve Chavura, Senior Lecturer in History at Campion College. Daniel Wild, how could governments be so stupid as to destroy power systems that work without having something reliable to replace them? Because, well, we're in Australia in trouble too, aren't we?
We're in big trouble. New Zealand shows that net zero doesn't work, Andrew. The decommissioning of baseload power, the bringing on of wind and solar, the unreliable energy has drastic consequences. We've also seen that in Victoria, 500,000 homes blacked out because of the commitment to net zero. And it has to be said, Andrew, here in Australia, both sides of politics share the blame at the state and federal level, where Coalition and Labor support net zero. It was, of course, Scott Morrison who signed the country up to net zero without public support, without debate. And the reality is that the more wind and solar onto the system, the faster the prices rise. To give you one example, from 1990 until 2007, when there was almost no subsidies, energy prices increased by just 3% per year, about what inflation was. From 2007 to today, it's triple that at 9% per year of energy price rises. And what happened in 2007? Kevin Rudd came in, we had the turbocharging of renewable subsidies and the carbon tax and the Paris Climate Agreement and then net zero. Prices will keep going up until net zero goes down.
Never forget that Kevin Rudd said that Labor policies to cut our emissions would cost Australians $1 a year. $1 a year. What a joke. Steve Chavura, there are parallels here. I look at the hatred of Jews in Israel, and I see that so many who are feeling this on the streets, the young, were never taught history, it seems to me, never taught history, never taught the origins of Western culture. And similarly here with the global warming thing, which is again a tribal movement, really tribal, it seems that no one was taught science. What do you think is going on?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and these kinds of tribal movements take hold in history from time to time. I think something that also needs to be said about this, because everyone's wondering, why is the Australian government just hurtling towards energy oblivion? The fact of the matter is, and Nick Cater wrote an excellent piece on this today in The Australian, the renewables lobby groups are possibly the most powerful lobby groups ever in Australian history. They are heavily funded of millions of dollars by very murky overseas funders, some of whom are tech billionaires who themselves have shares and interests in renewables. Who knows where some of the other funding is coming? And then these charities start lobbying MPs. They start funding the campaigns of future MPs. They funded the Teals to millions of dollars, and they either threaten or they promise political parties to put them in government or take them out of government, depending on their renewables policies. And so the Labor government especially is enthralled to these renewable lobby groups. Sadly, as Daniel said, the Liberal Party isn't far behind, and it's a tremendous opportunity for Dutton to push mining and to push nuclear, because this climate hysteria does not come from the Australian people. They're not into it. They would love to hear something about mining, something about nuclear.
You're right. Steve,
I am right.
You're right, but I just think
I'm always
decades of indoctrination. Oh God, I don't know. Well, let's hope. But Daniel, cultural notes. I mean, we talked about one aspect of culture. You know, the rise of the stupid. It's essentially, I'm being honest here. There's been an unusually strong backlash to the Prime Minister for joining the huddle to sing the club song when Hawthorn beat St Kilda in the AFL on the weekend. Although it does seem to me that he was perhaps invited into the huddle by some players. But, I mean, you have Channel 9's Tony Jones feeling a bit sick about... What's the big sin here? Why do you think fans and commentators are so upset?
Well, Andrew, it's hard to know where the AFL ends and the Labor Party begins these days. I mean, they're really one of the same. Of course, Anthony Albanese appoints... Sam Mostyn as the Governor-General. Where does she work? She was an AFL commissioner. So, the federal government, the Labor government, gives millions of dollars to the AFL, and in return, the AFL promotes all of Labor's favourite policies, whether it's the voice to Parliament, climate change, Indigenous issues. And the reason why fans are upset about this is they have had a gutful of sporting codes dividing our country and the politicisation of sport. And look, Anthony Albanese would not know the first thing about AFL, and that's fine. I don't know the first thing about rugby, but for him to use this as a political stunt is why fans are so upset, and it's just another example, Andrew.
Steve Chavura, I'm actually out of time. Have you got something for us in 10 seconds to sum up your feelings?
He didn't learn his lesson in 2022 when he was booed off the stage at the Byron Bay Blues Festival. Aussies like a separation between politics and fun. That's that.
Not just a separation between politics and religion, but also that other religion, sport. Stephen Chavura, well put, and Daniel Wild, thank you both for your time. After the break, Meghan Markle tells Nigerians she's one of them, and Nigeria is her home. But is it really? Identity politics, Meghan Markle style, after this. I'm puzzled by something from the Meghan Markle and Prince Harry tour of Nigeria. It's a tour of Nigeria and what's looking like a royal visit. And Meghan Markle has declared there that Nigeria is actually her country, because she's found out from genealogical tests that she's 43% Nigerian. And this is odd for me, at least, for several reasons, and not just because her father is white and her mother has some white ancestry too. So how did she get to the 43%? But anyway, joining me is Esther Kraku, writer, columnist and broadcaster. Esther, great to see you. Look, the issue here is not just that most of Meghan Markle's ancestry actually comes from Europe, or that she was raised in America by her father. It's, to me, trying to claim that you're of a country that none of your supposed ancestors have seen in hundreds and hundreds of years. At what stage does she say, for instance, she's American and home there?
Well, this is sort of diplomacy a la Meghan, and it's actually something that you tend to see a lot with African Americans when they come to parts of particularly West Africa, and they do a genealogy test and they say, look, I'm 16% Cameroonian or whatever. I happen to have done a genealogy test and I couldn't have been more Ghanaian if I tried. But the question is, how does this stuff like this land, and does this actually work? So, the royal family, for instance, have done many tours. The late Queen herself did many royal tours, and she couldn't go to every single country and say, I'm 1/16th Gabonese or I'm 1/7th Finnish or anything like that. You have to find other ways to connect with people, and actually learning about the culture, understanding how people live, the challenges that the country face. That's a stronger connecting point than saying that, you know, you're 43% Nigerian. I mean, I agree with you. The math there just doesn't add up, but I don't think people want to delve too deep into that because it's her truth and you don't want to get in trouble for that. But I think it's more the question of, you know, this is a kind of blunder you would expect when you're doing that form of diplomacy by herself. And also the trip was a bit bizarre because, you know, we have to remember this was on invitation from the Ministry of Chief of Defense Staff in Nigeria, which is the highest post you can hold in the military. And they were talking about, well, they were meant to be talking about Invictus Games. And then she goes to give a speech at the school. She hosts a Women in Leadership conference. Harry's talking about mental health. And it's kind of drifting away from the Invictus Games, which is what the trip was actually meant to be about, to kind of this broad, almost presidential PR tour for the Sussexes. And so you did kind of see a split of public opinion. Many Nigerians were thinking, well, this is a bit of a waste of public money. This is not like we're courting a state that can help us with resources. This is kind of like a faux royal couple that are there to kind of boost their image. And then you had the other side of the coin, which was, you know, it's great to have them there. They're kind of the Harry and Meghan defense squad, and they're just happy that they've broken off from the royal family and doing their own thing. But again, this is the kind of finesse that lack of finesse, I should say, you would see when someone has kind of torn away from the royal fold and doesn't understand these intricacies of diplomacy.
Yeah, but it's weird, isn't it? Because Prince Harry, right, he could go to Germany, and I would bet you, Esther, a lot of money that he would not say to the Germans, I feel at home in Germany. This is my home. Yeah. I am German, even though he's got much closer bonds, you know, and the family's passed to Germany, to the Battenbergs and all that kind of stuff. He could go to Greece and say, look, my father was the royal family of Greece originally. You know. They don't do that. But here, there's something different.
Yeah, here it's more acceptable. And I don't think they realize kind of how stuff like that would land. For them, it's just, you know, oh, it's a fun fact. This is how I connect with you. Look, I grew up in Ghana, and there was no shortage of people like Meghan coming over and saying, look, I'm 1/16th Ghanaian. And we generally used to ask, okay, do you know anything else about Ghana? Do you know how people live? Do you know anything about the languages, the food, anything like that? I think that's a stronger connecting point, actually learning about the people and treating them as full human beings, as opposed to, you know, treating your heritage as some sort of fetish. But again, this is something that I wouldn't hold against her because it's very common and it's kind of like a bit naive. But, you know, if you were within the royal family fold, they will know to tell you this is not something that you do. There are stronger connecting points that you can make with people, as opposed to just saying, I took a genealogy test and I'm 43% Nigerian. What if the other half of the genealogy says she's, you know, 57% Russian?
Look, absolutely correct. It's so patronising too. I could be one of you just by, you know, a little genealogical test. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Esther Krakow, thank you so much indeed for joining me. Really appreciate it. Honestly, this identity politics, a flight from the white. I mean, most of our ancestry is white. What does you bond with that? I don't know. Very weird. That's it from me. Coming up next, Sharry Markson. Good night.